Why is it that oftentimes in the relationships that matter most to us, we sometimes bring our worst to the situations and the relationships that mean the most to us? We all come into relationships with things from our past, baggage, so to speak. By the end of today's session, I want to help you. I want to give us all a big idea that will help us deal with the baggage from our past so we stop bringing our worst to the relationships that matter most. As a bonus, I'm going to give you yet another challenge to help you this week put into practice the truth that we're going to look at. Because remember, when we put love into action, it actually grows our attraction. That's why it's so important to stay up with these challenges. But as always, before we dive into this truth, there's a hurdle, a problem that we all need to overcome. So let's take a look at that problem. I've got a confession to make. When it comes to the relationships I value the most, so oftentimes I bring my worst into those relationships. I didn't know it, but before I got married, I thought of myself as pretty calm, pretty easygoing guy. But then when I got married and began this lifelong relationship that mattered most to me, some of the worst things inside of me came out. We all bring baggage into relationships, whether it's a marriage relationship or a friendship, and oftentimes the relationships that we are closest with can bring out the worst in us when there is conflict. For me, it came out in the form of anger and frustration. When I didn't get my way, all of a sudden I resorted to things that I brought into the relationship, things from my family of origin that I had learned over the years that I wasn't even aware of, that were inside of me, and they came out in some of the biggest moments of conflict in the relationship that I valued the most. I think there is a solution to this problem though. And I want us to take a look at this solution because all of us bring baggage into the relationship. All of us have a family of origin that comes into the relationship, and it oftentimes brings out the worst. But let's take a look at this solution. So we all, as we've said before, bring baggage into our relationships. The solution for all of us for this problem of bringing baggage into the relationships is a difficult solution to find because I just said we all bring that baggage into relationships, which means we all struggle with this. Nobody has been able to successfully overcome the baggage problem that comes into relationships. I want us though to try and tackle this by looking at a solution from what is referred to as the most wise man that ever lived, a guy named Solomon. He was the third king of Israel. And in one of his ancient writings, in the book of Proverbs, which is basically an old ancient Jewish scripture book of wisdom and truth, primarily written by Solomon, he addresses this issue of the baggage and the things that we bring into relationships and how we can overcome it so that we don't just fall in love, but we actually stay in love. Solomon wrote about a lot of different things. In fact, in one of his writings, Ecclesiastes, he tried everything, he said, everything under the sun to try and find purpose and meaning in life. And when it came down to it, he said the only thing that provides meaning is actually fearing God and following Him. In this proverb we're going to look at today from Solomon, he's going to address how we can overcome the problem of baggage that we all bring into relationships. So let's take a look. Solomon's famous book of wisdom, the book of Proverbs in the Jewish Old Testament scriptures, records this simple but really profound truth. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 starts this way. It says, above all else. Now before I go on to the rest of this particular proverb, you need to understand that Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived in that day and age, and perhaps in any day and age, has written a lot of wisdom literature. He's written down a lot of wisdom from his life and his experiences that have filled literally books and books of literature. And Solomon starts this proverb, this statement, with this short little sentence. He says, above all else. In other words, out of all of the things that I've written about, out of all of the wisdom that you could read from my life and experiences, this is the most important. This is at the top of the list. Above all else, he says, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. We oftentimes wonder, where do those awful things come from? In conflict in relationship. Where do those words come from that I say to the people that I love the most, and yet those words are the worst words that I could have used? Where do those actions, where do those words, where do those behaviors come from? Solomon would say, all of those things that are the worst that happen to the people that you love the most actually come from inside you. They come from inside of me, and they come from inside of you. Because our heart is the place where our actions, our words, and our behaviors all are rooted. Solomon said it this way, that everything in life flows out of the heart. So all of those things that you hate the most about the relationships that you love the most, the way that you behaved or the things that you said, they all come from your heart. That's why Solomon says it's so important for us to guard our heart. We oftentimes are better at monitoring the behavior of other people in relationships, like perhaps our spouse or our friends or relatives or people that we work with. We oftentimes are better at monitoring their behavior in a relationship than we are at monitoring our own hearts and guarding the heart, because everything flows from it. So this man Solomon says, when it comes to relationships, and when it comes to those things that you hate that you did or said in a relationship with those that you love the most, it's because we haven't guarded our hearts. And we've got to guard our heart in order for us to bring our best to the relationships that we value the most. So on a practical level, what does it look like to guard your heart? Not monitor the behavior or the actions or the words of other people in relationships, but what does it look like to guard our hearts so that we can bring our best into the relationships that we value most? I want to give you a challenge to put into practice the truth that we've just learned from Solomon, that we've got to guard our heart because everything in life flows from it, especially our emotions. Here's the title of the challenge. It's called the Heart Check Challenge. Here's how it works. I want you to grab a pen or a pencil and a journal, and at the end of each day, or maybe at the beginning of the day, I want you to reflect back on that day or the previous day. And I want you to identify any feelings and emotions that were negative from that relationship that you value the most from that particular day. And I want you to write them down. For those of us that are guys, oftentimes this is going to be challenging because when it comes to negative emotions, we think we only have two of them. The first one is frustration. And if we get really frustrated, then we get angry. But it all boils down to frustration and anger for most of us guys. The reality is there are so many more emotions and feelings that all of us experience, both positive and negative. And this Heart Check Challenge will help you to identify all of those feelings and emotions. To help you out with identifying them, I want to introduce you to what's called the emotions wheel. Some people refer to it as the feelings wheel. There are 8 basic emotions on the emotions wheel that then go into further depth of where those emotions and feelings are really coming from. Oftentimes, frustration can actually come from disappointment or betrayal or some other emotion that leads to frustration and then leads to anger. And I want you to, this week with the Heart Check Challenge, actually begin to identify those negative emotions that are impacting the relationship that you love the most. Identifying them is going to be the first step to guarding your heart. But if you can't identify those feelings first, it'll be difficult to guard your heart from those emotions and feelings in the future. So this week, take the Heart Check Challenge, grab a journal, grab the emotions wheel, and work on checking your heart each and every day so that you can identify them, and then you can begin to guard your heart. Now, before I let you go from the house, there's one last thing that I need to remind you about. Now, don't forget, when we started this session, we said that oftentimes the relationships that we value the most sometimes can get our worst in those relationships. And we want to bring our best to the relationships that we value most. The truth is this, that if everything flows out of the heart, then we've got to learn how to guard our heart. If everything in life flows out of our heart, we must learn how to guard our heart. I want to encourage you to do the Check Your Heart Challenge each and every day this week so that you can begin to learn how to guard your heart. Imagine at the end of the week, having done the challenge each and every day, imagine the difference that it's going to have and how it's going to make your relationships even better as you learn to guard your heart, because everything flows out of your heart. I can't wait to see you for our next session.